What's something completely normal today that would have been considered witchcraft 400 years ago but not because of technology? It's an odd one, but apparently reading without speaking the words aloud was very rare until fairly recently. In 18th century Europe, the then new practice of reading alone in bed was, for a time, considered dangerous and immoral. As reading became less a communal, oral practice, and more a private, silent one, and as sleeping increasingly moved from communal sleeping areas to individual bedrooms, some raised concern that reading in bed presented various dangers. That is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard. Such as fires caused by bedside candles. Oh, I guess that makes sense. CPR. I'm an electrician and our 1920s handbook actually say to shove your finger up the ass of whoever's unconscious in order to revive. Edit. Here's link to photo of document. Being a magician, especially card tricks. Is this your card? Burn him, earn the witch. Then later. Man, that was a close call with that witch. Yeah, good thing he wasn't a very good one. That wasn't even my card. Breakdance and beatboxing. See, this just makes me think that there must have been people who were as talented with beatboxing, sound effects like Michael Winslow back in the day. Was there someone hanging out in the taverns in Austria beatboxing chamber music for all the people to working class to go see Mozart's new opera? Or seafaring beatboxers during the Age of Exploration? Having cats in your house. Mostly women had cats at this time period, and due to this they weren't infected by the plague caused by rats, so they were considered witches, thinking they have some superpowers to not get infected. Edit. Just to clarify, cats can also get the plague and spread it, but the risk was reduced since they control the rat's population. Rats are the primary carriers of the oriental rat fleas Xenopsilla chiapis, which carries the bacteria that causes the plague, not cats. This is also where a ton of, though obviously not all, of anti-Semitism came from. Because the Judaic peoples had a lot of customs about washing one's body, as symbolic of washing one's soul, as well as very strict ideas about separating the dead from the living quickly and completely, at a time where ideas of how disease spread were incredibly archaic, and so hand and body washing was only done rarely. And corpses often lingered for days or weeks at a time. Jewish communities managed to dodge a lot of the worst of the plague. These communities were subsequently blamed for it and thus ostracized and harassed, and that fermented in the public eye for a few hundred years, and now we have people who hate Jews for absolutely no real reason other than it essentially being a family tradition at this point. How far along was hyper-realistic art back then? 'Cause that is borderline witchcraft here and now. Drawing, painting in a hyper-realistic style has become way easier after photography was invented. Now, you only have to copy a photo one-to-one and bam, realistic artwork. Before photos, you actually had to look at a three-dimensional object and try to capture it on a two-dimensional canvas. And you had to be quick about it, because the direction of your light source sun will change position, and the object you are drawing will change over time as well. Flowers wilt, leaves turn brown, and so on, much tricky. As soon as you opened your mouth they'd probably attack you, even if you were in an English-speaking area. There's some cool videos on YouTube showing how different English was over time. 400 years ago was the beginning of modern English. Shakespeare wrote plays over 400 years ago and they're written in modern English. Asking your wife for an opinion. This sounds humorous, but there are plenty of instances throughout history of men, powerful men even, respecting their wives' opinions and intelligence. I know it's not 400 years, merely 250 or so, but John Adams comes to mind as a man who absolutely valued his wife's mind and opinions. It is frightening how many people here post false stuff and lack a basic understanding of history, and that in so many fields. Most, if not all, comments are also really Eurocentric, and seem to focus on the European post-classic cliché we see in films. Not everyone was dirty, not everyone treated women badly. Especially when we look globally, but also not in Europe. And in particular also not in 1624, the Renaissance. People seem to think about 1024, and even then it depends on where in Europe. Depends more on where, not so much when. Modern day can find uncontacted tribes, pretty much anything would seem magic. Almost 4,000 years ago people had understanding and usage of the Pythagorean theorem in surveying and architecture. I have an ancestor that was a witness in the Fairfield CT witch trials, and I found a book outlining the trial he was in. The main accuser stated the most obvious reason this lady was a witch. She sat on the railing of her porch that one time, so that, not getting sick due to most basic of hygiene, like washing your hands after going to the toilet and before eating. Plus not getting sick from drinking water, because you boiled it for 20 or most medicines, but specifically penicillin. An infected wound would often result in amputation, if the leeches and offerings to the spirits of healing were insufficient. A medic in WW2 would have freaked the fuck out at him. Medic from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars forward treating an extremity hemorrhage with a tourniquet before trying to pack the wound and elevate, etc. Hell, a medic from Vietnam or the First Gulf War would do the same. That change happened in like the 7th of June 2005. Honestly, they probably would have freaked out at 4 bags and plastic syringes too. The first mass production of penicillin was done by the US ahead of the landings in Normandy on D-Day. But, you're right. It would be Star Wars treatment to them. I had no idea that was SOP now. Thanks. Yep. Learned it as standard going through combat medic training in 2008, and my sergeant at my first duty station struggled to catch up. He'd been deployed most recently in 2007 and was still operating off pressure, elevate, pack and wrap, all else fails kit. Dude retired at 20 years in 2011, he saw so much change. Emergency medicine evolved at light speed between 2001 to 2010 in war zones. Edit. A few words. And it's not like they had building codes or firewalls between structures. Actually, a lot of densely populated cities implemented building codes for fire safety after a larger fire had wiped out bigger parts of the city. Even as early as the Middle Ages. They mostly consisted of requirements for building materials: stone, brick instead of wood, shingled roofs instead of grass, straw. They had to rebuild the city anyways, so they could also try to make them safer along the way. If you think modern moral crusades against screen time are bad, let me introduce you to 18th century moral crusades against the novel. Yes, that's right, the evil and corrupting novel that will rot women's brains and destroy the very foundations of our society. Let's get even more ludicrous. For a brief time, potatoes were considered evil because, amongst other things, they led to sexual immorality. Yes, the potato. Which begs the question, if plain white starch is too sexually extreme, then what does that make other foods? Radishes must have seemed like literal Satans by comparison.